Welcome to the Doctors Making a Difference podcast, where we help physicians to be empowered with the tools they need to be successful in medicine, in finance, and in life. Join us as we highlight doctors and other professionals around the world who are making a difference. Doctors change lives every day, but what happens when life changes yours? A single injury, a sudden illness, your career, your income, your future can shift in an instant. The best physicians don't just plan for success, they protect it. At Set for Life Insurance, they believe financial security isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. True own occupation disability insurance ensures that no matter what happens, your future stays in your hands. Because protecting your income means protecting everything you've built. Visit drpodcastnetwork.co/set for life today. Secure your future before life makes the choice for you. Think about a career as a physician where you could work in academia and you could work in business and you could work in coaching. You could do it all. Today we have an amazing guest, Crystal Sodaitis, a physician who has joined us today. And Crystal, would you mind telling our audience about yourself?
Yes. Hi. So, thanks for inviting me. And my name is Crystal Sodaitis. I am a pediatrician by training. And about 12 years ago, I transitioned to be a healthcare executive. And about 5 years ago, I became certified as a life coach. And about 3 months ago, as of the recording of this podcast, actually more like a month ago, as of the recording of this podcast, I became a podcaster.
So exciting. Again, like I said at the beginning, Crystal's done a whole bunch of stuff, and it's really interesting to kind of hear about your career as a physician and all these different branches. Do you mind kind of walking our audience? How did you choose medicine? And this really interesting, diverse career you've had, and I'd like to hear more about that journey.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, I was one of those people who knew I wanted to go into medicine for as long as I could remember. Even my mom tells stories about me being, 6, 7 years old and telling people that I wanted to be a doctor. I had initially thought that I wanted to do pediatric surgery. But then once I got to my first anatomy lab, I thought that the cutting into people was just incredibly tedious. So I sort of was foregoed thinking about pediatric surgery and ultimately ended up in academic general pediatrics. So I did a 3-year pediatric residency, and I then followed that up with a 3-year fellowship in academic general pediatrics, where I got a master's degree in public health. And as I got a lot of teaching on how to conduct grand rounds, how to create a good grand rounds, how to do, journal club, how to lead journal club. But one of the other things that we had to do as fellows is we had to teach a class to the interns called Managed Care 101. My fellowship program director at the time, so I did my fellowship at Texas Children's. Texas Children's has had its own small health plan, CHIP health, Medicaid and CHIP health plan. And my fellowship program director was the medical director for that health plan.
So you were near and dear to that. He had a lot of knowledge, a lot of working knowledge of that.
Yes, exactly. And she had done her master's thesis also on something related to health insurance.
Oh, how interesting.
So she sort of started me down that path. I loved teaching that class. I loved teaching Managed Care 101. I thought it was really, really interesting. I finished my fellowship. I went on to just a typical academic career, never thinking that a job like that, being, the medical director of a health plan, I never thought that that was would be a reality for me. For any of the, TCH graduates out there, TCH is sort of like a world unto its own. So it's not surprising to me now looking back that I thought that this was something that was very unique to TCH. So I go on, I'm going on to my academic practice. I put healthcare instruction into anywhere that I think it fits. I even put a healthcare module into a newborn nursery rotation. And fast forward about, we'll say 8 years, and I'm having a difficult time at work. And as one does, I start looking for a new job. At that point, I was the medical director for our mother baby unit. And so I searched, the search term I used was medical director. And what came up was a health plan utilization management medical director. And when I read the job description, I knew immediately that this was the perfect job for me. I applied for that job and I was not qualified at all, but I had an amazing recruiter that talked to me, and I talked to a few other people who had also transitioned to non-clinical careers in utilization management. And they gave me kind of a roadmap for what I needed to do. And so over the next 18 months, I started to gain more experience. I did some additional training so that the next time a job description came up or a job came up for a utilization management medical director, it was actually sent to me by a friend. I applied and I got the job. And to say that I felt like in those first few days of training, when you think you're initially nervous, right? When you're moving from a clinical career to a completely non-clinical career. And I coach a lot of people about this because people come to me asking me, how was the transition? How did it work? Do you miss clinical medicine, et cetera? You are nervous. You are really nervous about leaving what you know into this completely, to me at the time, unknown situation. And within those first few days, I knew I had made the right choice. I would tell people, like, I feel like I found the golden ticket for me. It's a really interesting career. You're always, thinking about and talking about issues on the forefront of medicine, because the first time somebody does a procedure, you have to decide, are we going to cover this or not? And so I did that and started to go up through the ranks at my health plan. Along the way, I discovered coaching and was listening to a lot of podcasts about coaching, never really thinking that I could be a coach until I discovered a woman named Chris Plackey. And she was a coach for managers at the time. And I started listening to her podcast and I realized that I could use coaching as a tool in my leadership tool belt. And so with that information, I decided to get certified as a life coach, thinking that the coaching tools I would use only as a leadership tool in order to manage my team and manage myself. But along the way, I fell in love with one-on-one coaching. I think that it fed that caregiver, right? That service provider aspect that all of us as physicians have. Because I had been out of clinical practice at that time for probably 7 or 8 years. And so it really fed that desire to help people. And as you're going through coach certification, you start thinking about who you're going to coach. Is there going to be a specific population of people that you want to coach? And I realize now I am a parent for all the other physicians out there that are parents. I have this, baseline thought that in order to be a physician, in order to be able to make it through medical school, you have to be cognitively gifted in some way. And so when you are a gifted person, you often have a gifted child. And anyone who has a gifted child and has dealt with some of the challenges of raising that child and educating that child knows that if you do a Google search for, help me educate my gifted child, there's a billion hits. But once those children grow up into adolescents and young adults, the services and the help for how to raise them and how to help them kind of fall off. And there's pretty scary statistics that talk about the amount of failure, depression, suicidality in gifted adolescents and young adults. So I really saw that as a need in the gifted population. And so that was the first group that I started coaching when I got certified. Within that young adult group is residents. And the more I started coaching physicians, I also got hired as a contract coach for a company that coached only physicians. And the more I coached physicians that were neurodiverse, meaning that they also had ADHD, they had autism, they had, social anxiety, the more drawn I was to that population. I also have a fair amount of neurodiversity in my own family. And so eventually, about 3 years ago, I shifted to almost exclusively coaching neurodiverse physicians. And so I do that. I still work full time as a healthcare executive. And so coaching is sort of my side gig that still gives me a lot of joy and a lot of pleasure. And because, I don't watch a lot of TV, I decided to start a podcast.
Well, so I'm interested just kind of thinking about this really interesting journey that you've been on. You spent, if I've kind of adding up the math that you gave there, you spent about a decade in clinical practice, and then you spent about a decade or so not in academia, but you've kind of turned it back into clinical practice just a little bit, working with physicians specifically.
Yes.
I'm just interested to kind of compare and contrast those two jobs, because you certainly found your way through academia, academic medicine, and were successful in that. But then you found your way into this more administrative role, and you're still adjacent to clinical stuff because you're managing a health plan, but then you felt the need to directly connect with patients, basically, with people who needed coaching who didn't have a place in it. Again, I'm interested to kind of compare and contrast those two experiences you've had.
Yeah. So, being in academia and caring for the patients, there's a lot of being a pediatrician. You see a lot of really happy, healthy people. And you are just and one of the things I love about being a pediatrician is that you are walking with parents and trying to help them raise the healthiest children they can. It's similar to coaching in that most people come to coaching they're generally okay. But there's a part of their life that they just want to tweak, that they just want to get help to get better. So it's similar in that you're walking along with them to create the best experience that you can. It's very different. There's not that aspect in managed care and in health insurance. Health insurance and I'll tell you one thing about when I first started in my managed care role. So when I was deciding for pediatrics, again, it was never really a choice for me. Like, oh, do I do medicine? Do I do pediatrics? Do I do orthopedics? It was always very pediatric focused. But I also knew in the back of my mind, I never really wanted to take care of adults. I really loved taking care of children. Now, what happened when I transitioned is that the cases that I would review was all medicine. And because of other circumstances and just the way business works, I actually ended up managing a I'm sorry, a Medicare population. So people over 65.
Right, not kids.
Right.
Not
And
very
so
many.
I had to really quickly start to understand adult medicine. And what I learned and what I realized was I really love medicine. I never wanted to take care of adults, but the medicine that goes into the pathophysiology and the issues that come up in adulthood was still really interesting.
Well, it is a fascinating thing. I think all of us are drawn to medicine. Part of it is the interest in patients, but the subject material is interesting. I remember the first time I took a microbiology class, or I think it was just a general biology class in my undergrad, I thought, wow, this is cool. I mean, I had
Yeah,
had it explained a little bit, but never at that depth. And
yeah,
I just remember walking out of class every day like, that is the coolest thing I've ever learned.
right.
And other people that weren't interested in medicine thought it was a terrible class, but I was just like over the moon excited about the topic.
Yeah, exactly. And that's my existence almost every day. Even just today, we were talking about a new technology and just the science behind it. I'm like, wow, if this actually works, that's amazing. It's fantastic.
Oh yeah.
I'll never forget the first time I realized that we could use BCG vaccine to treat bladder cancer.
Right.
I was like, what?
Like, why would that work?
That's possible? Completely blew my mind. Completely blew my mind. I mean, that was probably close to a decade ago. That's pretty common practice now.
Right,
But
but
at the
think,
time, it was
who would have thought of that?
right, right. How did we think like, oh, why don't we like infuse someone's bladder with this vaccine? Like, who thinks of those things? It's amazing. And the fact that it works.
Well, another interesting thing on this, this podcast is primarily for physicians in training, but I'm thinking to my own kids, and we talk about what they're going to do. And my oldest daughter's birthday is today. She's turning 20,
Happy
and
birthday. Oh,
she's kind of interested in pediatrics and various things, and we talk about what would you do with your career. Maybe none of them will choose medicine, but I think in their minds they're like, oh, I don't know if I want to be a pediatrician or a family doctor. I don't want to do this thing because I see what my dad's schedule is like, and I don't want to have that. Or the only doctors I know do this one path. But what you're describing, Crystal, is this huge, diverse group of researchers and specialists in every kind of field, and people who are in an administrative and a coaching role. And I mean, there's literally just thousands of jobs you can do with a medical degree. And well, those of us who are in medicine can appreciate that, but those who are considering it, or maybe who are already in it but are looking for a change, realize you have a very valuable, very diverse set of training that is so unique. And there's not that many people in our country or in the whole world who have that level of training. It really is quite a gift.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And medical training and practicing medicine really helps us to create so many transferable skills. We develop so many transferable skills. I mean, differential diagnosis is just pattern recognition and being able to put different pieces and synthesize information to be able to communicate it effectively, ideally in a language that patients can understand. I mean, those are skills.
That's true. While we're on that, I'd be interested if you wouldn't mind sharing, how do you develop some of those transferable skills? Like you did that. You specifically looked and said, okay, I think I'm going to fit better for my career in this management sort of thing. And then later on, you looked and said, I think I'll fit well with coaching. How did you acquire the skills? Because on paper, when we're done with medical degree, you have an MD or a DO, and you might have a master's degree in something health adjacent, or if you're lucky, maybe an MBA. But I'm curious, how did you go about that? How would you tell someone whose interest is piqued by this conversation? Where should they start?
I think the best place to start is to not be in a rush, to get quiet. I have had a few times in my life when I knew that there was something, I knew I wanted to do something else. But I didn't know exactly what that was. And so I just quietly, I would listen, I would learn, I would take a lot of courses, and I wasn't in a rush. And so, and that's why when the coach certification training was announced, I knew immediately, oh, that's what I'm going to do. That's exactly what I'm going to do. When I was listening to Chris Plackey's podcast, I never even thought about being a coach. I was just listening for my own education. But then there was something in me that I knew immediately when it was announced that's what I was going to do. It was the same thing when I said about coaching neurodiverse physicians. I took about a year to quietly discern and think about like, do I want to focus just on this population? I coached people, I listened, I picked up some other podcasts about neurodiversity. And I think that that's one of the keys is don't jump. There's no rush. Get quiet, learn as much as you can, follow your interests, and just trust that when the it, when you hear it, you'll know.
Well, and that is interesting because I think I know for myself, and as I talk to people, I think we all get locked into this mindset. This is my background. This is my training. This is what I'm good at. And I never really thought about that. It's that physicians have transferable skills. It may not be represented on your resume or on your paper, but you do have those teamwork skills, the ability to critically think, and the ability to synthesize information. And if you, so I just reflecting on what you're saying, Crystal, sitting back, thinking about it, I feel like that's the hardest part about a busy medical career is it's hard to find quiet time just to sit and ponder and think about direction because you're so busy putting out the fires and documenting everything and
Yeah.
taking care of all of the issues that present as a part of that natural part of that career. So that's a good, I think that's pretty good advice to sit back and reflect and say, what would it look like if I found it? What would it look like? And then you'll know it when you see it.
And I think as physicians, we are always trying to fill the space. And sometimes we have to, if you have a commute, right? Most of us, even if you're only driving 5 minutes, do it in quiet. Don't, make a conscious effort to at night not be on your phone or on a tablet until the very second that you're going to close your eyes. Allow yourself the discomfort of 5 to 10 minutes of maybe not being able to fall asleep and just being there with your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think that kind of meditation, seeking inspiration, seeking influence, and I mean, it really has an important part in my life, and it sounds like really important part in yours as well. You
Yeah.
know, with that, I want to reflect also back on your discussion about kids and young adults who may have had a lot of opportunities given to them because they had something in the neurodiverse category, their ADHD, anxiety, autism spectrum, whatever it may be. And then they transition into young adults, and they may have some assistance during college years, maybe depending on if they access it, but they're not nearly as close knit as they would be in a high school or junior high setting. And then they go into their early career, and I've witnessed doctors specifically who have not done very well in their first part of their career.
Yeah.
Along the journey, and probably a lot of them do have one or more of those things, but they're extremely gifted in their knowledge of medicine and their love of taking care of patients. And so I thought that was an interesting insight you made that that there really isn't a real formalized coaching discipline for those people. And I think we're kind of told like, well, you're a doctor, you have it all figured out. And
Right.
boy, you do have a lot of things figured out as far as how to take care of patients, but sometimes your own personal life could still use some help. And it's hard to know where you would turn because most people who haven't been in the medical field wouldn't really understand the specifics of what it took to become a physician and what that life is like, and maybe some of the pressures you're under. So, do you have any more thoughts on that, Crystal?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And what adds to that difficulty is that many people, many physicians, because they are so gifted, they're able to manage the cognitive load to get them through sometimes medical school or residency without even recognizing their learning difficulties. I coach a lot of people who are newly diagnosed as adults, especially women, because the diagnostic criteria is male characteristic based, not female characteristic based. But we have, you know, we as gifted people have the ability to daydream in class and still be able to retain enough information to do not just pass, but to do well. And so it's only when, and I'll take ADHD as an example, but because it's the most common, but ADHD is ultimately a difficulty in executive functioning. Organizing and executive functioning is basically just organizing and following through on tasks. And so many people, especially gifted people, can do that up to a certain point, but everyone hits a wall. And sometimes that wall is residency, the added, organizational tasks needed in residency. Sometimes it's getting married and having a child. That you're managing, but suddenly now you not only have to organize yourself, but organize someone else. There's a lot of accepted stereotypical behavior that only in retrospect do people realize, like, oh yeah, that's my ADHD. Sort of like, there's sort of this idea of like emergency room doctors, right? That they all, are mountain bikers and kind of adrenaline seekers, and a lot of that is ADHD. And the reason why that you have that sort of stereotype. It's like, oh, they like to bounce from patient to patient, and they're adrenaline seeking. In the emergency room, there's often a lot of traumas, a lot of emergencies. They're adrenaline seeking, but we don't see that. We just see that as a highly gifted individual who maybe likes procedures, or maybe likes that high intensity,
Yeah.
maybe likes that high intensity clinical practice, but then they can't get their notes done, and they're often late to work, or their home is not very organized.
Right. No, I think we've all seen the type, and it's true for. I mean, you can kind of look across different medical specialties, but just as individuals, I think society, most people I know, that they would say things like, "Oh, well, that person is a physician. They've got it. They must have it all figured out together." Or we excuse the atypical behavior because, well, they're a doctor. They can't be good at everything, or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then on the backside of it, sometimes you see physicians who really go through some personal trials and trauma and difficulty, and they really do have a hard time knowing where to turn because society has set this really high bar that you're going to perform at this level, and that you're not going to break down emotionally, and that you're going to show
Yeah.
up to work, and you're going to show up at 2 in the morning and deliver my baby, and have a smile on your face, and you're going to do yada yada yada. And when you feel not, you don't know where to turn, people can
Yeah.
feel like they have nowhere to turn. And I think that you get that combined with the extreme busyness and the workload, and people's lives are literally depending on your decisions. That can lead to that whole like suicidal ideation pathway like you described. And so it is
There's
important to be able to reflect and say, this is what I'm struggling with. I'm a human being. This is what's going on. And if I need help, I'm going to find it, whether it's through my colleagues or my peers that I trust, or counseling, or life coaching, like
right.
all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge amount of shame because physicians are, people think that, oh, you've got it all together. And, especially many of us on the outside, we appear as if we've got it all together, but yet there is a lot of shame in that, you think I have it all together, but in the meantime, I've got medical records on my back and I'm about to have my privileges suspended because I can't get my charts done. Or, yes, it appears like I have it all together, but I hear this a lot from especially women physicians, like, I can't have anybody in my house. It's completely disorganized. I can't get my laundry folded. And that can lead to a lot of shame and guilt, and depression.
Right. No, it's kind of this unmet expectation that I'm going to be good at everything. Because to
Yeah.
a certain point, you can really be good at everything. I remember one of my classmates in medical school, I was in Utah, and he would go skiing, I don't know, like 4 or 5 times per week. And I couldn't believe he would be able, and
Yeah.
he would be top of the class. He was just an amazing, amazing student. And so you have people with that level of a gift, that ability to understand and assimilate details and perform really high on an academic level, and still not have to sit in class, just listen to the lecture on your headphones while you're skiing, and not everybody could do that. But this
Yeah.
person I'm thinking of was amazing. And so we have to be able to recognize that while you have certain strength, there's also some challenges that come with that. And I'm glad you've been able to find that.
It reminds me, so there is a term called the spiky profile. And I believe in this strongly. And that is that it's a balance. Like there are some areas where if you think of a spiky profile, kind of like an uneven star,
Hmm.
where there are some places where you just excel and you do great. And there are other places, there's going to be someplace else where you really struggle. And so, yes, that person may have the cognitive ability to do well in medical school while skiing 4 or 5 times a week, but I can virtually guarantee that there were areas that they also struggled considerably. Maybe
Well,
it was an organization,
it
maybe
sure
it wasn't.
wouldn't work in residency. You have to physically
Yeah.
be there, and in you're attending practice, you kind of have to be there. So there's a lot of different opportunities and challenges that come with that. What would you say to someone who is seeking, who's found themselves kind of in that pickle where you've boxed in, you've created this expectation set that maybe the community or your peers or your employer or whoever has expected you to be at this super high level, and you start to feel shame and say, I can't hold it together. What would you say is that person's first step to know what to do besides reflecting? We talked about that, but how would you instruct someone to begin the process of kind of understanding themselves and getting help?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the first thing is that um, you should speak to your primary care physician. If you feel like there is no shame in asking to have a PHQ-9 or a global anxiety. I think it's the global anxiety scale,
Yeah,
GAD,
yeah, that's
GAS,
right.
right? And just do a screening. Just see how you're doing. Obviously, if you score high on any of those scales, then you should seek medical treatment. But if you're not clinically at a place where you think you need or want therapy, there is a place for coaching. To be clear, coaching doesn't treat things like anxiety and depression. It can be a good adjunct, but really, coaching is to help people to reframe the way they're looking at something so that they can maximize their you know maximize their functioning.
Hmm. I almost think people
Coaching is
need,
really intended for well functioning people who want to go to the next level.
yeah, I almost think as physicians, you almost need permission to seek help. It's interesting because people have got this unrealistic expectation, and so I could see a role for someone who says, I need permission to be able to let go of something or change or to be imperfect in something, and I think we all go through that experience just naturally as part of life. But you almost need permission to say, okay, it's time for me to recognize this thing and change and adapt. And so I could see a real role for both formal counseling and as well as coaching, and all of us have to have a little bit of humility in that to say, okay, I recognize that I need a little bit of help to improve and change. So,
Right, right,
no,
exactly. Like when I coach people, let's say we'll stick to ADHD, that again, maybe they're having a little bit of shame around not being able to get their charts done, or they're having interpersonal relationship difficulties because of their impulsivity. Those are absolutely things we can work on. But if you're having depression, anxiety, that's not something for coaching.
Right. All right. I want to shift gears here for a minute. You have recently become a podcast host, which is
Yes.
such an interesting change of pace from what we've all talked about here. And I would like to have you plug and kind of talk a little bit about this interesting podcast that doesn't really have that much to do with medicine, but is fascinating.
Yeah, so this is a plug for passion projects, for doing passion projects. This is my second passion project that I've done. The first was a book. I wrote a collection of essays about children, about, well, people in the sandwich generation. Um, and I'll send you a link to that if anybody's interested
Yeah.
in reading that one. But my latest passion project is a podcast. So I am a huge cruiser. It is the preferred vacation type for our family. I absolutely love cruising, and I can talk about it all day, every day. I also love luxury and the finer things in life. I can't afford to cruise luxuriously most of the time, but I still think it's fun to talk about. I grew up with Robin Leach and Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous for people in who are Generation X. But now we have like, I think millennials had Cribs, and now we've got, Keeping Up with the Kardashians and all kinds of Real Housewives. And we love watching that stuff because we love watching how really the 1% or the 0.1% live. And so I wanted to make a podcast that talked about luxury cruising. I also found that I'm a podcaster. I absolutely love podcasts. When I first got into cruising, I started following a bunch of different podcasts, but none of them really touched on this segment of cruising. Most of them talk about the contemporary lines or mainstream lines like Carnival, Norwegian, Royal. Nothing wrong with those. I cruise Royal almost exclusively. But there was nowhere where I could hear about like the really, higher end suites or super luxury lines where they're, serving you caviar in the surf.
Oh,
And
goodness.
so that's what I decided to focus my podcast on. And it's been fantastic.
Well, and Crystal, I admitted to you before we started that I have never been on a cruise. It's on my list of things I would like to do. And so I'm going to tune into your podcast because I want to hear more
Please
about
do.
cruising and what it entails. And, and if we're going to go, I want to make it a good one. So I think that it sounds pretty cool. So tell us the name of the podcast one more time.
The podcast is called Luxury Cruising. I don't make things difficult.
I like it.
It's
Keep it
just
simple.
luxury cruising, and it's available everywhere you can. Certainly on all the platforms that we're listening to this podcast on, you can find my podcast.
Right. Well, so Crystal, this has been quite an interesting journey, as pediatrician in academia and going through your career in insurance managing and coaching. And I think there's a lot of insight and wisdom that's come through that experience. Do you have any other final thoughts you'd want to leave with our audience? Anything else you would point them toward?
I will, if anyone is interested in neurodiversity or coaching, they can follow me. I post a lot about neurodiversity on LinkedIn. They can follow me on LinkedIn. I'll send you a link to my website, my blog. Welcome to reach out to me if anyone's interested in potentially coaching. I'd love to schedule a call with you. And certainly I can link to that. Send you a link for that, a link to that for your show notes.
Excellent. Crystal, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I look forward to staying in touch, and I really appreciate all the things you've shared with us today.
Take care.
Thanks. Thanks for tuning into the Doctors Making a Difference podcast. And thank you for what you do to help your patients and your community. Your work truly helps so many people. We produce this content to help you have the tools you need to stay in medicine and to highlight the amazing work being done by physicians around the world. Please note that while I am a physician, and many of the guests on this program are also physicians or other professionals, the discussions on this podcast do not represent my employer or any professional organizations to which I belong. This podcast is for your information and entertainment only, and should not be taken as professional advice. You should seek appropriate professional advice pertaining to your own situation. Please check out more of our content on our website, doctorsmakingadifference.com. Also, please follow, like, or subscribe on your podcast player or YouTube channel and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps to spread the message. Finally, if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, or if you'd like to nominate someone else to be a guest, please visit the website or email admin@doctorsmakingadifference.com. See you next time.